It has been said that if you wish to see far ahead in time, you must first look far back to find lessons from the past. The archiving of documents from the past and the present is an important source for architecture and design. It captures the passing of time. It is a testament to the evolution of the discipline. The following masterclasses record the individual processes of professionals and their ways of working.
Hello, my name is Valerie Maasburg. I am the director of the Artist Book Collection at Ivory Press in Madrid, and I will talk today about special collections. The function of archives, collections, and libraries is to identify important works for the future, preserve them, and make them accessible to the public and to researchers. I would like to share my experience here at Ivory Press about trying to achieve these three aims. Ivory Press was founded 25 years ago by Elena Ochoa Foster as a publishing house for artist books. These are works of art in book format, in our case, with a very short print run. Since then, the project has evolved and encompasses now a wide range of areas and activities within the framework of contemporary art, including an art gallery and bookshop, art consultancy and art exhibitions curatorship, editorial services, audiovisual productions, and education. But most importantly, I would say Ivory Press is a center for books and dedicates great part of its space to showing artist books and the archive. First of all, I would like to talk about the Ivory Press collection. Ivory Press founding publisher Elena Ochoa Foster started collecting artist books about the same time she started publishing artist books in the mid-90s. Since then, the collection has grown and houses now some of the most unique books produced since the 19th century till nowadays. The collection encompasses several examples of livre d'artiste and compelling example of artistic engagement with poetry and text made during the first half of the 20th century. Furthermore, it extends to post-war artistic practice, encompassing works by a variety of artists such as Dieter Roth, Marcel Brotthers, Bruce Nauman, Ed Ruscha, Robert Motherwell, Sol LeWitt, and James Lee Byers. Selecting is a very important part of the task of a publisher, so it somehow becomes natural for a publisher to collect. It's not surprising that many publishers have created really great book collections. I would like to show you now a few examples from the Artist Book Collection. I would like to start with one that has been actually published by Ivory Press. Edmond de Waal, Breath. It was published in 2019. It's one of our latest artist books. And I think I would like to talk about this one, not only because it's a very important work of art in itself, but also because it highlights the importance of the publisher's archive. So I will give you some examples of the materials that we have from the process of making this book. Edmond de Waal is both an artist and a writer. Actually, if you go to his webpage, you will find on the first homepage that you can choose either writing or making. And for our artist books, he brought both of these practices together, since he wrote the text for the edition and also made the work itself. He says, for both the writing and the making, there's a sense of trying to bring something into focus out of ex nihilo. And he brings these both disciplines together wonderfully in Breath. Breath is an homage to the work of Romanian-born, German-speaking poet Paul Celan. The book contains poems by Paul Celan, both in the German original and English translation. And it also contains a text by Edmond de Waal about this poet who he admires very much. And he tries to make a book worth of Paul Celan. The poet, Paul Celan, had a very typical way of working. He used to overwrite his poems and used to scratch out words and overwrite them. And this way of working like a palimpsest is what Edmond de Waal takes as a base for this book. So he overwrites words But first, he applies kaolin, a kaolin mixture. The kaolin is the raw material of porcelain, the material he uses for most of his artworks. So he applies the kaolin to the paper and then overwrites it by hand. Edmond de Waal published also a book that's called The White Road, in which he explains the journey that porcelain made from Asia to Europe, from the east to the west. And the countries he found especially important in this journey is China, first of all, then England and Germany. He found there is a parallel between the journey of porcelain and the journey that paper made, also from Asia to Europe. And so he asked us to find papers from China, England, and Germany, handmade papers for this edition. So we found several examples of these papers, and we've sent it to him. I've included here an image of this paper research. But when we sent these papers to him, he started to apply the kaolin to the handmade papers, and we found that these papers would not support very well the kaolin since they would bend like this. So in the end, we had to use more industrial papers. But here you see a little bit of the process of how this book really came into being. On the next slide, I'm showing you here some images of the box for the book. It was quite a complicated process to get to the final solution, because we wanted the box to hold the book, the installation, and also to convert into a lectern for the reader to install the quite big vellum-bound book on the box itself. Here you can see how the project evolved. In the beginning, the installation was thought to be a reminder of the Japanese tradition of writing with these materials and elements they would use. But in the end, Edmond de Waal decided that he would handwrite of very thin, translucent porcelain tiles, small passages from the poems of Paul Celan. In this slide, you can see images from how we brought into perspective the size of the book with the installation, and some images from the kaolin tests on the already printed pages. On this slide, you find images of the medieval manuscripts Edmond de Waal selected for this edition. These are manuscripts on vellum that have been used for binding. And now we are reusing the reused manuscripts in the binding. You will actually not see it in the book, but it's inside the vellum binding in the spine. As I said, you can see it, but it's there, and it's part of the journey of this book. Let's jump to another example, Les Habitants de Malmö, published in 1994. This is not a publication by Ivory Press, but of the Kunsthalle Malmö. Actually, Christian Boltanski's artworks make as much sense in a museum than in book format. He often does both versions, a book version and a version to be installed in a museum. And in this case, he simply took the telephone directory of the city of Malmö, added the cover page to it, and an errata sheet. In the errata sheet, you will find a list of names. These are the people who died that very year, and therefore you cannot call them anymore. So in this book, Boltanski shows that the referential function of lists is illusionary and draws attention to our mortality and the contrast between the institutional and the personal, between memory and forgetting. I would like to share another example from the Artist Book Collection with you. This is the Green Box, published in 1934. by Rousselavie. Rousselavie is the alter ego of Marcel Duchamp himself. Marcel Duchamp is a French-American conceptual artist. And this is a collection of notes and reproductions of his ideas, of the whole thought process that brought him to making the large glass his so-known masterpiece. Obviously, these notes have been previous to making the final piece. It's the final piece itself is only a version of an artwork that exists actually in the mind of Marcel Duchamp. And the green box is not only a documentation of this making of the artwork, it's part of the artwork itself. Let's say the green box doesn't make sense without the large glass, but the large glass doesn't make sense neither without the green box. And here is another example from our artist book collection. This is a collection in itself. These are the Kassettenkataloge, which the museum in Germany, in Mönchengladbach, published in the 1960s and 70s. Instead of traditional catalogs accompanying the exhibitions, they gave the idea to the artist to use the format of the box to create an artwork that would then be reproduced and given or sold to the visitors as an artwork itself. So each artist could define the content of this book or object completely freely. All these books get a safe place when they enter our archive. I don't want to go too much into detail here, but everybody who works with artist books knows that sometimes preserving artist books can be really a challenge, since they can be made out of a variety of materials. In our collection, for example, we have a book made out of lead in the case of Anselm Kiefer, of glass in the case of Olaf Eliasson, acetate in the case of Ed Schlossberg, fabric, a variety of materials. On this slide, you see some images from our archives. You see some of the materials that we preserve of the making of the books. It's very interesting because in many cases you learn a lot about the creative process of an artist from these materials. In the case I've commented previously with Edmond de Waal, you see how he finds parallels, how he uses the parallel between the history of porcelain and paper and tries to represent all of this in the book. I'm especially interested personally in the third purpose of an archive, which is to share the materials that you have in the archive with the public. And in this aspect, we try to find many ways to do this. First of all, I would like to mention the permanent exhibition of artist books. Great part of our space is dedicated to this collection, to let people engage with the collection. It's a permanent collection, but it's also always changing, since we take some of the books for conservation reasons to the boxes and take others out. And we also try to install them in a way that allows the books to dialogue between them. For example, we have Richard Tuttle's Not the Point. That's a work about the concept of the color, in the same room than Joseph Alber's Interaction of Color, which is also conceived as a class on color. But our activity is not limited to showing artist books in our own space. We often collaborate with other institutions as well. Let me give you here a few examples. Blood on Paper, The Art of the Book, was an exhibition which Ivory Press curated in collaboration with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and which took place at the museum there in 2008. The title made reference to Pablo Neruda's comment that truth could only be written in blood. The exhibition featured books from the holdings of the V&A, from the Ivory Press collections, and from some private donors. And like this, Blood on Paper stands in the line of exhibitions that helped situating the artist book as a medium in itself in contemporary art. Here you can see another example of an exhibition in collaboration with other institutions. In this case, it's the Museum of Modern Art in New York. They have this library council which publishes an artist book every 2 years for their donors who give money to the library. Ivory Press installed this exhibition in 2016. And since then, it's actually part of our permanent exhibition and grows every time the MoMA Library Council publishes a new edition. And then, of course, there is our 25th anniversary program in which we're collaborating with 14 institutions in Germany, the United States, Spain, England. All these institutions will host an exhibition of several artist books of Ivory Press in dialogue with their collections. Of course, it's wonderful to have exhibitions of artist books, but sometimes you feel you would really like to see all the pages of the book to learn about the sequence of images. And therefore, we came up with the idea of the Artist Book Club, which we celebrate every first Tuesday of the month. Right now, because of the restrictions, we can only celebrate it online, but we hope we can go on with this idea very soon. The idea is to take out books around a topic or from one particular artist, and show all the pages to the public. Always one person from our team prepares the club and gives a general introduction into the work of this artist and especially the bookmaking. Here you have an image of a colleague of ours explaining the books of Sophie Kahl, and to the right you see the artist book about the artist books of Christian Boltanski. Obviously, the most interesting way to learn about artist books or artworks in general is to listen to the artists themselves. So we often organize panel discussions. Here you see an example that was a panel that was called Artists and Books in February 2019. The invited artists talked about their relationship with books in general and about their bookmaking as well. This was moderated by Hans-Ulrich Obrist. Here there's another example. It's a conversation between Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Michal Rovna, in which the artist talked about her interest in memory and her creative process. Here's an example, Edmond de Waal talking about his project Breath. I think it's a very special example because Edmond de Waal really took over Ivory Press. He had his exhibition in our exhibition space. We made his artist book Breath, and he also made a selection of 100 books, the reading room, that allowed visitors to engage with his favorite books and learn a lot more about his thought process. In the case of Edmond de Waal, we organized also a poetry reading of the poems of Paul Celan from Breath. Members of our team turned the pages of the 6 books at the same time, while a Spanish actor read the poems in German and an English professor of literature read them out loud in English. It was really a beautiful event. We also arranged workshops about bookmaking, about techniques for artist books. In this case, these images are from a workshop by Japanese artist Kaoru Kojima, who showed techniques to make pop-up books. Here we also have images from a workshop about the books of Bruno Munari. At this moment, of course, we are facing the same problems as most of the institutions to allow people to engage digitally with their collections. You have to find new ways through social media to allow people to interact or to get to know the holdings of the collections. And in this sense, it helped a lot that we have produced over the years videos of most of the exhibitions and other contents we have made here at Ivory Press. But in any case, we're looking forward to having the experience again, or to share the experience of exploring artist books also in the physical space very soon.